Oh, sorry. I don't know what everyone's talking about. Being a Dark Knight kicks ass. Endwalker drops, and all of a sudden everyone's got a problem with Dark Knight. So I made this class, and general consensus is that the devs failed to improve upon it this expansion. I don't think it's as bad as everyone says it is. Now I know what you're thinking though. Why would I take advice on combat from a roleplay channel? I've mained Dark Knight since I was a high enough level to get to Ishgard and drop Paladin. When Endwalker dropped, I automatically got the Unbreakable Principle achievement right after launch, since I had already cleared 700 dungeons beforehand. I've tanked and cleared savage raids on it, and I've spent the majority of my time in combat on this job. I love it. I've strayed from the path, and found myself using a Gunblade, or picking up Paladin again if I'm feeling nostalgic, but I always find myself back here, with my Shadow Buddy. Not to say that the job is perfect. There are some ways it can be improved in my opinion, but the plethora of low-hanging fruit, hot take videos on Dark Knight are bad. And I don't want people thinking I'm white knighting the Dark Knight, so I'm gonna try and be as objective as possible in this video. It's actually pretty easy to critique this job because its flaws are glaringly obvious. The overall lack of sustainability via self-healing. In Endwalker, Gunbreaker got 2 stacks of its regen and a regen applied to its active mitigation. Paladin got the same treatment, a regen applied to its active mitigation, along with its already existing tools like Divine Veil and Clemency. And Warrior is basically a green DPS at this point. Its entire class identity is based around self-healing, and this is important because I'll be going more into this later on, but yeah, anyway, Dark Knight has Abyssal Drain, which is really more suited for big pulls since it heals you based off of how many enemies it hits, and Soul Eater, the third hit of your single 1-2-3 combo, which doesn't leave you with a lot of ways to recover your health. And this is where a lot of the discourse lies, I believe. Judging Dark Knight on its ability to self-heal is like judging my ability to not be sexy. It's just not possible. If all the tanks had the same damage mitigation tools, the only difference between the classes would be what JPEG they use for the weapons. A lot of the tanks already have the same GCD setup, a 1-2-3 single target combo, a 1-2 AoE combo, and some bigger blows that typically take a resource to use. This leaves only how they handle damage as a distinction in playstyle, and this is where Dark Knight is separate from the other tanks. Allow me for a moment to make a small comparison. We have Astrologian and White Mage as regen healers, and Sage and Scholar as shield healers. They made this very public when they were announcing the reworks for classes in Endwalker. However, a little less obvious is they gave the tanks the same treatment. I've put this together to help illustrate my point a bit. Warrior has more healing than some healers, so it's on the degaffs and just heals it off side of the spectrum. Gunbreaker has some regens to work with, but it's not as much, so I shifted it a bit to the left. Paladin gets Holy Sheltron, which applies a regen and actively blocks incoming attacks, while Dark Knight has the Blackest Night, the center point of its entire kit. I made it 3 minutes into the video before I mentioned Blackest Night. I should get a cookie for that. Once you hit level 70, your entire playstyle revolves around this cooldown. It serves 2 purposes: actively mitigating damage, and providing a free use of one of your OGCDs, Edge and Flood of Shadow, or Darkness at earlier levels, single target and line AoE respectively. If you know anyone who's played this class, you've probably heard them prop this cooldown up at some point as the best goddamn cooldown in the game. So much so that Square Enix caught wind of this and just gave a version of it to all the other tanks. But rather than form a system around breaking the shield, their abilities usually come with a bulk of effects, ranging from regens to flat heals to like a teeny tiny barrier not nearly as chunky as the Blackest Night. Meanwhile, the Blackest Night remains unchanged.
But yes, if the other tanks' cooldowns are like Blackest Night, but with regen, doesn't that just mean Blackest Night is a crappier version of their cooldowns now?
Nope.
It's on such an insanely short cooldown that it's almost always readily available. And as long as you have at least 3,000 mana left over, it'll be there waiting for you, like my dog waits for me at home to punch me in the balls. It doesn't need the extra effects, because the sheer abundance of its use is the focal point. You're not constantly tossing out regens and heals, you're stopping attacks from hurting you. You know, like a tank. Granted, the other tanks feel so goddamn invincible now, I can see where people might be salty about the lack of changes made to Dark Knight this expansion. Which is where a lot of the ire comes from, I'm sure. My opinion is that if it's not broke, don't touch it. Dark Knight didn't need a massive overhaul of its kit because it was in a pretty good place in Shadowbringers. However, a teeny bit of balancing I feel is in order. The only new mitigation Dark Knight got this expansion was Ablation. 2 stacks of flat 10% mitigation. Basically take Aurora from Gunbreaker and change it from a regen into a flat mitigation and boom, that's Ablation. And I admit this does feel a little bit uninspired. It feels like the Blackest Night Jr. Yeah, you can place it on yourself or another person, but it doesn't feel nearly as rewarding to use. This would have been a good skill for a regen, I think, to give Dark Knight that little bit of self-healing that it needs to feel as sustainable as the other tanks. Or perhaps blend it with the Blackest Knight's identity a bit. Maybe if TBN breaks on a target with Ablation on it as well, a regen gets applied. I don't know. I don't hate this ability, but I'm not in love with it either. The solution I hear suggested oftentimes is that Blood Weapon should recover HP instead of MP. Sucking the life force out of your enemies certainly fits the Dark Knight motif, but I don't think people realize that this class is about balancing MP, not HP, because MP gives you TBN. And if the class was structured in a way that TBN was not the focal point, then this would be more viable. So in the end, healing and shields, it's 2 sides of the same coin, man. One just sits on top of your already existing health and the other fills it back up. However, like anything in life, nothing is perfect. If TBN doesn't break, you don't get your sweet, sweet dopamine release of using Flood or Edge of Shadow. And since it's a whopping 25% of your health, there are instances when it won't break. So do you nerf TBN's overall mitigation and make it to where it always breaks, but fuel the fire of not having enough self-sustainability? It's a difficult problem to solve. That's the worst part of TBN. The best part of TBN is that you don't have to put it on yourself. You can put it on someone else. Don't worry, man, just stick it on that squishy-ass black mage or healer or something. I guarantee you it'll break in that situation. Assuming they're about to get hit by some raid-wide AoEs. Dark Knight isn't a big, scary, angry guy in armor chilling in the back of a room. Nah, man, Dark Knight's the metalhead that watches out for people in mosh pits. This duality puts Dark Knight more comfortably in a party position rather than soloing content. But that's what Paladin's for anyway. Alright, we're up to that part of the video. Get out the dead horse. It's time to talk about Living Dead. Our invulnerability has to be the absolute worst in the game. For those of you who don't know, when you activate Living Dead, you enter a state where if your HP drops below 0, you become a Walking Dead. And while you are a Walking Dead, if you are not healed to 100% health, you die. So, yeah. And just as I was about to finish recording the audio for this video, they announced that they were going to be reworking Living Dead. So,
I'm invincible!
I hope it's good. Even if it was just the same thing as Warriors Holmgang, sure. I mean, why not? We already took half their fucking kit anyway. So, is Dark Knight as bad as all the clickbaity videos make it out to be? I don't think so. Do I think that making this video is derivative and... well, I guess being a Dark Knight is suffering.